Hello, thanks for tuning in to my channel. Yeah, my name is Stuart. My website, lpclassical.co.uk, also sell records. And I'm trying to generate enthusiasm, keep vinyl alive. I know that the revival at the moment of vinyl is predominantly being driven by younger people buying sort of pop and house music and everything. And the classical side of it, most people have, I believe, gone over to CD and streaming. So we're in the minority, but it's nice to see turntables out there still being made. And Deutsche Grammophon have got their original Source series, so we've got new vinyl still coming through. But predominantly, I'm interested in older issues of vinyl, going back to the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. That's what I really sort of specialize in, as a collector, as a listener, and as a seller. And it's all very subjective with vinyl. I've had somebody on my channel saying, "What's wrong with C? Why don't you just forget about even the original Source series? Why don't you just go for CD and streaming?" And my answer to that is that it's all very subjective, and I just happen to prefer the sound of vinyl. I know that technically, if you look at all the statistics and measurements, technical measurements, um, digital sources do a better job. Um, there's some other factor in play. I don't know what it is, but I just like the sound of vinyl more, get more enjoyment out of listening to it. But that's not objective. That's just a subjective thing. It's like me saying I prefer chocolate ice cream to vanilla. There's no point arguing with it. We've all got our individual preferences. And hey, it must be good. It must be good because if you think that all the disadvantage of listening to vinyl, I mean, it must be good for us to go to the trouble of actually doing it and not just having one of these Alexa things where we can say, oh, play me Furtwängler's 1953 Bayreuth performance of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, which you can have now just by, it's absolutely unbelievable technology. And here I am listening to these things. Okay, so the reason I've got these three records, the Mozart string quintets, as a body of work, I really rate them very highly, and his quintets are some of the best work that he did. That particular combination of chamber music, and my favorite performances of those works are the Budapest Quartet. I believe they're either late 40s or early 50s performances. They were done on tape and then put onto Microgroove records. So yeah, we've got these three records. We've got, I mean, the best of the three of them is this one, this green jacket, K515516. Fantastic pairing, very contrasting works. The tragic kind of minor work by Mozart. That G minor quintet is just absolutely, it puts you in another mood when you listen to it. It's so sort of deep, emotionally deep. And the quintet K515, it's more playful, it's a major key work, and it's more upbeat. I mean, I'm not really good at describing music, but it kind of lifts the mood when you listen to it. There are so many interesting musical features in that quintet. K515, it's one of the great quintets. These works as well, K593 and K614, really superb quintets, brilliant, fantastic listening. And then we've got, well, the quintet in C minor K406, I believe, is a transcription from one of the wind serenades. I can't remember the K number, K388 possibly. Okay, and then there's the early quintet K174. The Budapest Quartet on this Philips mono. I mean, they've got an old school sound, a really sort of warm, sort of old school sound. I mean, a lot would say, oh, it's old fashioned playing, it's been superseded and everything, but I really like the phrasing. I like the musical understanding, and I like the way as an ensemble, they really seem to gel together. The Budapest Quartet, I think they're probably my favorite quartet for Mozart. I've heard them playing Brahms and what else? Some Beethoven, but yeah, these are really, and of course they've done the Haydn quartets. I mean the Haydn set that Mozart dedicated to Haydn. But yeah, now I believe that these are Philips made in the UK. These also came out in America under the CBS label, I believe. Um, Actually, in the film The Heart is a Lonely Hunter, oddly enough, that the main character there gave the girl. I remember he gave her this gift of these quintets, which I think she never got to never got to play. I remember seeing the set. It was like a box set with this picture on the front of the bust, this still life, the bust with a cello, violin, and etc. And I think that was CBS. So yeah, okay. So that's my recommendation. Absolutely amazing, and they're mono. It doesn't really matter that they're mono. They just sound incredible. Okay, let me just move on to my anecdote. All right, so we're going back to when would it be? Probably 1998, I think. Now there was a there was a dealer who was well respected. I think he was American, and he published a book which was well known in classical record collecting circles as the Red Book. And basically, in the Red Book, he laid out all the differences between the labels and everything. Wide bands, hi-fi stereos, and blue and silvers. And I think that he gave away information about which ones were more desirable, and he also had prices in there, either that he would pay or that he was selling for. And I think the object of that book was to encourage people to sell him records. So he was quite successful. And he charged money for that. It was like £10. You couldn't have it for nothing. There were other dealers who actually were giving out lists of records they were looking for and the prices they would pay for nothing. But his book was, it was kind of special. So his name was Richard Zeff. I never met him. But I'd heard about him, and he had a reputation as being very knowledgeable in the trade, and he seemed to be one of the top classical record dealers. I don't know how long he'd been doing it, but one day I got a phone call, I think it was 1998, from a colleague who was also in the record trade, just like me. And he said, "Oh, Richard Zeff has died. I've just heard. And I've just been speaking to his wife, and she's wanting to sell his stock. What do you think, Stuart?" And I said, well, it sounds interesting. I said, if he's got as many records as I have, we're going to need a lot of money. Because I didn't expect that we could go down there and buy the whole lot for £500. I mean, if he had as many records as I did, and I had, like 15,000 records, and 10,000 of those were, like a basic wideband or better, and then there were another 5,000 that were less than that. So I mean, I had really high quality stock, and a lot of it. And if I was selling my stock in those days to another dealer, I don't know, I'd probably be wanting about 50, 60, 70,000 pounds. I mean, it would be a huge amount of money. So I wasn't really short of stock in those days either. So when he said to me, "Are you interested?" I said, well, yeah, I mean, maybe we can work something out. But I said, we'd probably need a hell of a lot of money to buy those. And my money, a lot of it is tied up in stock. And I said, oh, actually, I know another dealer who, maybe three of us could put enough money in to buy these. And my colleague said, yeah, that's okay. Yeah, he said, he said, that sounds okay. He said he wouldn't be able to go and look at them, but he was passing the information on to me on the understanding that whatever came out of it, we would go, we would split it up financially, and he would benefit as well. He was just giving me the information, and obviously that was the deal that I was happy with. So I contacted this other guy that I knew, who I actually helped to get into the business several years before. He lived in a different part of the country. I had a good rapport with him, and I did help him out in return for something. So I called him up, and he was interested. He came over. I was living in, where was I living? I was living in Nottingham at the time, and he came over and met me. I think he drove over. I think we actually met somewhere, because he lived in the west of the country towards Wales, and I think we actually rendezvoused somewhere, because it was on the south coast. It was quite a drive down. So we rendezvoused somewhere. We might have even met at the place itself, possibly. I can't remember, but I know that we called her up. We agreed to meet her, and we went in. She was a lovely lady. I remember that. She's in her like mid-40s, And I remember her being attractive, sort of blonde hair, very pleasant looking. And I remember thinking, I think Richard Zeff was in his 60s and he obviously married a much younger woman. And I remember thinking, what a shame to die and, you know, leave a lovely woman like that behind. You've got everything to live for, and oh, you know, terrible situation. But nevertheless, we were there. We were there to help her out by buying the records. So it was a good sized house. I think, as I recall, it was a Victorian semi in this seaside town. I can't remember what the town was, but it was on the south coast. And we went in and we started looking around. There wasn't probably as much stock as I thought there would be. He didn't have as many as I did, maybe just a half or a third as many as I did. And I must admit, I was a bit suspicious when I saw that there were not as many there as I expected there to be. And I looked at my colleague and he looked a bit doubtful as well. Nevertheless, we started raking through them and we started going through them and we saw a lot of what we would expect to see. We saw a lot of very boring bread and butter wide bands and, white and golds. But what seemed to be missing were, what we used to call the real cherries, like the Kogans or an Ida Handel or a Marzi or anything, or a big Ansame SXL 2000, all the really kind of interesting records that would make it worth your while to take on the whole lot were curiously and suspiciously absent. So we kept going through them and we were still drawing a blank. We just couldn't find, we just were not finding. We thought, well, maybe he's got his gems somewhere all in one place. Maybe there's some inner sanctum that we've not seen. And we asked her, are there any more? Has he got anywhere else that he used to put them? And she said, no, this is everything. And I conferred with my colleague and I said, you know what I think's happened here? I think somebody else has been in and beaten us to it and they've taken the best of what she's got. And he kind of put his hands on his hips and he nodded his head. He said, yeah, I think that's probably what's happened. I said to him, look, I said, it's best not to say anything to her about this. I wasn't really happy because I'd never liked it going to look at a collection if another dealer had been in and bought all the best records. And as I recall, I'd asked her, has anybody else been? And she'd said no. But, looking at it, it looked to me like somebody had been and really raked out every last, really interesting record, to the extent where I would only be prepared to buy records out of that collection if I could pick and choose at £1 or £2 each. But I wasn't really even that enthusiastic about that because I'd only be taking back to my house in Nottingham records that I already had. I mean, at one time I would have, think of a common sort of SXL wideband. Let's say Giulini conducting Mozart's 40 and 41st Symphony. I would have maybe 3 or 4 copies of that at any one time. And so I didn't really need to have more of that. I needed the really rare records. So, I said, oh, let me have one more look around. Let me look in his office. Maybe he's hidden somewhere. And I went to his desk in his office and I noticed something. And what I noticed was this. I noticed two index card holders about this size, closed. They were red. Yeah, red book and red index card holders. I opened them up. And in those index card holders, I found cards with names and addresses on them and various numbers and dates. And I started going through them. I realized that this was Zeff's mailing list. These were all his customers in Japan and South Korea and in America and various other places. I realized immediately that we had something of value after all in this house. And I wanted those names and addresses. I had my own mailing list, of course, but it had been very hard work compiling over a number of years serious buyers from, the Far East. It was a kind of business where you've got to build up you've got to build up a trust between the seller and the buyer. With the Orientals, there was this kind of relationship that once you got it going, it paid back handsomely. And obviously, yeah, I had all those names and addresses, and they weren't my customers, they were his customers. But nevertheless, I thought that it would be worth having that mailing list and all those cards. So I called my colleague over. I said, "Oh, look here. I think this is his mailing list." And his eyes opened wide. And I mean, I had maybe 50 to 100 names on my list, and a lot of those would be duplicates. But I mean, he had at least 500 there, 500 index cards. So I said to him, I think that we should make her an offer for this list. Now, she came in, and I just quickly said to him, "What do you think we should offer her?" And we kind of agreed on a price. It wasn't a massive amount of money. It wasn't really, I mean, compared with what it was, and it would be divided in three, what we'd have to pay for it. So, yeah, so I offered her in cash a certain amount of money, and she was quite surprised. She was delighted to know, that I said, "Look, unfortunately, we're not interested in your records." I said, to be honest with you, we're already very well stocked up. And we were hoping there'd be more sort of unusual items here, and there aren't. I don't know why that is. Maybe Zeph focus on different kinds of records than we do. I knew that wasn't true. I knew somebody had been in, but I just said that. And so I said, "But we'd be interested in these. We're prepared to pay a certain amount of money." And she said, "Oh, I wouldn't really want to let those actually go." And I said, "Well, okay." I said, "Is there a shop anywhere near here with a photocopier?" She said, "Oh yes, actually, there's a newsagent down the road." So what we did was we took the cards, we took them to this newsagent, and it cost us about, I can't remember, £20 to photocopy the whole lot. So I think we photocopied them twice, one for him, one for me, and then I would photocopy another set for my colleague in Nottingham. So yeah, so we paid her, and we got the names and addresses, and I was very disappointed about the records, but I was very pleased with the mailing list, and I added those mailing lists to my own, and obviously I did fairly well out of them. I must say though that the vast bulk of them, in those days we used to send out physical catalogs. I had a catalog. I just listed items under categories and under labels, and it was just a line of text. And yeah, people bought records on that basis in those days. It's nothing like my website where you can actually see the jacket and everything. People would buy records in those days on that basis. And I sent my catalog out to, I think there was 500, and I think that I got a fair return out of it. But I mean, the vast majority of them I never heard from, probably because they'd built up a relationship with him, and then to suddenly receive my catalog out of the blue, it didn't really resonate with them. So that's fair enough, but I did get a good return out of that mailing list. Yeah, so that's it really. So I don't know what happened to the records. I don't know what she did with them, but I mean, this is why if you've got a big collection of records, to be honest with you, it makes sense to make a will if they're worth money and decide what's going to happen to them. Do you want some dealer coming in and picking out the cherries and then leaving a relative to dispose of the remainder hopelessly? It would be better to leave instructions behind about how to dispose of them, and maybe even to separate out the really valuable ones or list them so those can then be circulated around dealers to get in the best possible offer. That would be my advice. If you've got a collection, and especially if you're getting on in years, don't just leave your relatives with the prospect of disposing of them. Okay. Well, that's all. Hope you enjoyed that story, and also my comments about the, about the Budapest Quartet. So I would recommend those records to you. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.